Good evening and welcome to Benefit of the Trout. My name is Bobby FishFace, and tonight, voter fraud, a new focus point of the always terrifying 2016 election, thanks to the impulsive whims of unshackled runaway Republican candidate Donald Trump, who has now taken to shaking the foundation of democracy by challenging our long trusted and respected electoral system. For a man who claims to be great at winning, he sure seems to be awesome at preemptive sore losing. He's basically the LeBron James of it, which will be great for his next ghost-ridden book, The Art of the Loss, an autobiographical guide to undermining elections, sporting events, and other fair competitions before they're even finished. Chapter 1, I Know You Are, But What Am I? In past weeks, his confidence on the subject has grown from speculation to bold guarantees, saying, quote, "Of course there is large-scale voter fraud happening on and before Election Day," end quote. And also the subtle, quote, "They even want to try and rig the election at the polling booths, where so many cities are corrupt and voter fraud is all too common," end quote. Well, the proof is in the pudding, and this pudding is being peddled by Trump's sycophants in his campaign staff, family, and within the RNC. Leading the dangerous defense is former mayor of New York and current mayor of Halloween Town, Rudy Giuliani, and RNC members such as Peter Goldberg, Sean Steele, and Lori Klein Corbin. Close behind in the fight against democracy is Reince Priebus, whose failure to weigh in on the incipient problem is just as shameful. Priebus eliciting derision from a prominent Republican cuttlefish who said, quote, "Grow a spine." That's right, Trump's divisiveness has even managed to peg Republican cephalopods against each other. Silence has become the most common response to over-the-top Trump rhetoric from Republicans, especially when those who have the courage to condemn his actions are hit with bipartisan criticism from within their own party and the rank-and-file Trump base, as well as derision from Democrats for not renouncing Satan in their hearts earlier. I mean Trump. And although these preemptive claims of election rigging have been met with some support from fellow Republicans, proof is a little harder to come by, mainly because, unlike being a Republican, it requires a fraction of morality. In fact, most experts on the subject say the amount of voter inaccuracies to expect on Election Day is near negligible, and often caused by technical issues and procedural errors. But one of the great cases being touted is the 2012 election, where in over 50 counties around Philadelphia and other areas, Mitt Romney received 0 votes, which some claim was clear proof of a rigged election system. Well, if getting 0 votes in a small, primarily black community is proof of a rigged election, I bet after November 8th, there will be much more proof. Furthermore, in a few communities in the rural South, in places such as Louisiana, Obama received 0 votes. Clearly showing that receiving 0 votes in an area is not proof of voter fraud. But let's just sweep that evidence under the bed, along with other unfavorable details like accountability, decency, and Roger Ailes. Apparently 2 men who sexually assault are one too many to defend, even for Kellyanne Conway.
The term locker room talk. You had the highest ranking woman in Congress, Republican woman, Kathy McMorris Rodgers, blowing that off and saying, no, this is suggesting sexual assault. And
that's a very unfortunate phrase, and people really should stop using that.
Why?
Sorry, Miss Conway, I didn't invent English. And may I also add, you have no shame. A final problem with this guaranteed voter fraud is that in the unlikely case someone is actually able to beat the airtight electoral system, it is far more likely that the skewed result would be in the form of extra votes for the Democratic candidate, not less votes for the Republican. It is a lot easier, although still near impossible, to vote twice than it is to erase votes from the system. It's like lying to your family about a boyfriend. It's much easier to just make one up when you don't have one than it is to convince your family that the one you had never existed. You brought him to dinner once, Sally. His name was Chad. He rode a Razor scooter, and we all remember it. You can't erase that from the records. It just doesn't work that way. Now, unlike voter fraud, voter intimidation, on the other hand, may be a very real problem in the coming election and can cause big issues on Election Day. Now, since the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voter intimidation, literacy tests, and other strategies to squash votes has been relatively under control. But in an unprecedented act, Donald Trump is enlisting voters to be, quote, election observers right off of his website and asking them boldly to, quote, help me stop crooked Hillary from rigging this election, end quote. Which is truly offensive and downright dangerous, especially when you hear the anger that has been coaxed out of some Trump supporters. The Boston Globe found Trump supporters proudly admitting to being a part of this election observing, and one of them, Steve Webb, a 61-year-old from Fairfield, Ohio, went as far as to say, quote, I'll be looking for, well, it's called racial profiling. Mexicans, Syrians, people who can't speak American. I'm going to go right up behind them. I'll do everything legally. I want to see if they're accountable. I'm not going to do anything illegal. I'm going to make them a little bit nervous. End quote. Now that is terrifying. And by the way, if you're racially profiling, then making those targeted racial groups accountable and nervous, spoiler alert, you're doing something illegal. That's voter intimidation. If you took it any further, it would just plain be a hate crime. Now, the Trump campaign has issued a statement saying, quote, we reject violence in any form and will not allow it to be a part of our campaign, end quote. But then in the same disclaimer, it continues on to add more incendiary rhetoric with, quote, those who hold unacceptable views do not represent the millions of Americans who are tired of the rigged Washington system. Trump is basically saying, I don't encourage violence, but if that's where you're into, then here's a bunch of made-up reasons why it's a good idea. But I don't support it, but here's where you sign up. So my response to all these baseless accusations and pleads for civilian monitoring is that if Trump can preemptively claim that the election will be rigged, then we should preemptively accuse him and all of his surrogates and constituents of voter intimidation. And if and when voter intimidation, or God forbid, racially or politically motivated violence, occurs at the polls, we should know who is directly to blame. I'm sure we will be able to trace their online applications right back to their deplorable acts. So let's bring back accountability at the end of this election and have some justice, because if the shoe fits, or in this case, the tiny, tiny gloves, then we should be ready to get out our equally small shackles. And now, on a lighter note, here are some lowlights from the ragtag news organization unofficially branded Trump TV. It may lack the luster and polish you would expect from the Gilded Age-obsessed candidate, and it certainly won't have the fan base of The Apprentice, but it certainly fits Trump's new profile as an alt-right icon and shameless narcissist. Please bear along with the audio lag, low light, and lack of makeup. Trump is a little short on cash right now after this 2-year-long vanity project.
Listen, here we are. We have Governor Brewer with us right now.
Yeah. Are we on here? I told you we're on. We're talking.
Governor, it's Facebook Live.
A couple more minutes here. Boris, let's run through real quick if we can. Let's talk some about the specific issues that are coming up tonight. Because let's lay out the format a little bit. We got Chris Wallace, who's going to be. We're going to keep the governor on with us for a little bit. All right, Governor, we're going to keep you on. We want to get you in on this too.
Vice presidential debates. So
all right, welcome back into our first ever Facebook Live event here on Donald Trump's Facebook page. Doing pre-debate coverage, doing post-debate as well, so stick around for that. We got Boris Epstein. He is the Epstein. He's telling me about this every time. Boris Epstein,
every day we're
senior
working hard.
advisor.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bobby FishFace, and good night.